Do you ever struggle when it comes to deciding your composition for your landscape photos? What if there was just a set of rules that you could fall back on when you were kind of stuck? Well, g'day, my name's Ben Fewtrell, and I've been shooting landscape photos for well over a decade now, and I can tell you that I certainly struggled with my composition in the beginning, and I've slowly picked up quite a few different tricks and tips or ways of getting photos that I'm really happy with. In this video, I'm going to share with you my top 7 composition tips that you'll be able to start implementing into your photography straight away, and hopefully you'll see some better results. Tip number 1 is to create depth in your images. Now, the brain is a very clever piece of equipment inside your head. Well, for most people it is. And it can calculate distance based on what it's seeing in an image. Now, if you think about an image, it's two-dimensional. And so one of the challenges with creating an image that really has that ability to draw people in is depth. And so by including something that the brain can easily calculate distance with is one way to create depth in your image. Now, a jetty like this is a very classic way to do it. We know the jetty is not getting thinner as it gets into the distance. We know that is actually a long way away. And this is quite a good example because and I've called this Forever Jetty, this image, because the jetty does seem to go all the way to the horizon, although it does stop eventually. Pretty amazing jetty. And so this is one way you can create that dramatic depth in your images. All right, here's another good example of how to create depth. Once again, the wall here on the left-hand side that is also leading your eye into the image is made up of these blocks of concrete that are the same size all the way through to the Opera House here in Sydney. And you can also see the buildings on the other side of the harbour. So it really does give you a clear indication of the depth, and it starts to make you feel like you're standing there looking into the scene. Now, depth doesn't always have to be created by a man-made structure that the brain recognises. Now here, this is called Bombo Quarry, and this wall of rocks is made by natural forces. Mother Nature put this one together for me, which was brilliant. And you can see that by standing at the very beginning of the wall and photographing it disappearing off into the distance, there is definitely the ability for your brain to calculate distance. Now, a big part of that is the fact that you can see the waves, and the waves are slowly getting smaller as it moves throughout the image, and that allows your brain to see the depth or the distance and calculate that automatically. So it puts you into the image, makes you feel like you're standing there. So, when it comes to depth, it doesn't have to be a man-made structure. It can be something that is quite natural, but something the brain can quickly calculate the distance with. All right, tip number 2 when it comes to composition in landscape photography is to find some way of framing up your subject. It can really draw the eye to it and make it stand out, or make it the hero of your image. This is the Great Wall of China, which you can imagine is probably photographed an awful lot. And I'm standing inside one of the the watchtowers, and I'm taking a photo of another watchtower with the mountains or the layered mountains in the background. And so I really like the way that this framing has allowed you to really focus in on that particular watchtower and the wall as it goes off into the distance. And this is a really great way to be able to draw people's attention to a particular point in an image. Now, framing can also be a great way to make something that is really well photographed into something different. And here this works really well. So I'm inside one of these little concrete I don't know what they are, sandstone little rooms near the harbour bridge. And they've got sandstone arches. The harbour bridge just happens to have an arch across the top of it. So it just works really nice from a symmetry point of view. But I really want you to focus on the fact that I'm using that as a tool to frame my whole image up. And so once again, by finding something unique, like this arch, I'm able to frame the harbour bridge up and make it a different kind of image that really is interesting. This is one of my most popular harbour bridge photos, believe it or not, and it always amazes me because I didn't think it was all that special, but when it comes down to the detail of the frame, the sandstone, it really does have a lot of warmth to it and a lot of character, and I think it works really well. Now, I'll give you one more example where I've been framing something up. And this particular one here is a good example of a day where the skies were really grey, they were really boring. And if I took a landscape photo or a wide angle photo of the whole scene, there would be a lot of just very flat grey sky. There wasn't even detail in the clouds. And so by doing this particular technique where I found some way of framing the hero of the shot up, which obviously is the building inside the frame, I've been able to come up with something pretty unique. And at the same time, really capture the detail of the ruins, all the bricks, the mortar, the broken bricks, all of that, to really give you that sense and feeling of what's actually going on here in this image. All right, on to tip number 3 now, and it's leading lines. This is probably something that you have heard before, but I thought I'd show you a few examples of how you can use leading lines. In this particular example, we're using the lines painted on a road in particular, and the road and the contrast of the road with the grass to really lead your eye up to the mountains. Now, this is Mount Cook in New Zealand. In fact, the big mountain that you can see in the foreground is not Mount Cook. Mount Cook is the small white peak that you can maybe see popping over the top of that mountain. But I was on my way there, and I could not resist when I saw this particular piece of scenery. It's just amazing. So, leading lines are so compelling to me. You're also seeing something that you'll see in a lot of my images is the leading line will come out of the left-hand corner. I don't know why that works so well for me, but it is one of the things that I do a lot. So you'll see that when it comes to leading lines, it doesn't have to be a line painted on the road. It can be something like a tree fallen over in a lake. This is Lake Mile, or Mile Lakes rather, just up north of where I currently live. And this tree had fallen over in the lake and created this leading line. Once again, as I said, coming out of the left-hand corner, drawing the eye into the image and actually dragging your eye away from the shadow, the boring shadows on the left-hand side of the image. Which, if it wasn't for this particular log in the water, I probably wouldn't have taken this image. It just would not have worked. There was also a little bit of framing going on here with the trees overhanging at the top of the foliage, but more it's about the leading line of the tree, dragging your eye into the image to see the beautiful pastel-y sunset. And one more for good measure. Here's another great example of leading lines. Now, this is where Mother Nature and man-made have joined forces to create two leading lines. Now, there's one coming from the left, which is the one that is the man-made structure. And if you look from the right, there's actually a tree fallen over that's also leading your eye into the image and dragging your eye up the stairs and into the forest. Isn't that exciting? So leading lines are all about, creating that effect where you're going to pretty much tell the viewer where to look, and that's why they work so well in any image. All right, we're on to tip number 4 now, and it's all about movement. Now, this is the Sydney Festival of Lights. It's called Vivid Sydney, and the lights are moving all of the time. Now, if you were to do a long exposure, it would just be a big blurry blotch of color and I wanted to really depict the movement. So what I've done instead is I've done a technique called pull zooming. So it is a longer exposure. It's only probably half a second or something like that. And I've quickly moved the zoom ring on the lens to create this effect of movement, which can be quite exciting. So this is just another idea that you could be implementing into your photography to give your compositions that something a little bit different. Now, when it comes to movement, of course, there's the obvious, and that is capturing the movement of the water or of an object inside your image that is moving by blurring that. And we do that by keeping the shutter open for a little bit longer. Now, I love to do this with water because I really feel that I want you to feel like you're standing there and you can almost hear the water crashing on the rocks. You can almost feel the spray from the mist off the waterfall on your face. And it really does give you an idea of how ferocious and how fast all this water is moving. And so, when it comes to composition, sometimes one of the things that is often overlooked is creating that atmosphere or that feeling of what's actually going on. So you're not just capturing a photo, you're capturing the moment or the feeling of what's happening in that particular point in time. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be water. It could be something else. Now, this image here incorporates a lot of the tips that I'm covering in this video, but we're really going to just focus on movement because that's what this 4th tip is all about. Now, you'll see the red lines on the right-hand side leading your eye up into the Opera House. That's the tail lights of cars passing through. And on the left-hand side, you'll also see movement from the ferries that are cruising around in the harbour, although that's doesn't stand out as much. But the movement has been captured here, and the idea, it's almost like standing in still in time, but all this movement around you in this busy city, although there could be a lot more lights, of course, but it does just give you that little bit of movement, just makes it a little bit different. Now, this is also a great technique if there is a lot of traffic getting around in a scene where you don't want to actually capture the cars. In this particular scene, most of it is taxi cabs going past. They're quite ugly, and what I'd rather do is just have that movement going past to sort of give you that feeling of hustle and bustle in the city. You'll notice also there's no people in this image. I've either photoshopped them out or I've waited till there was no one there, but quite often if you do a long exposure, here's a little tip for you, people will disappear. It won't capture them. And so that might have been what I've done here, but I can't remember, but I've definitely wanted to capture the movement in the image. All right, tip number 5, and this is getting you thinking outside of the square or outside of the landscape orientation is what I'm trying to say. Sometimes it pays to flip your camera into portrait mode. Sometimes there are things either side of your hero that are either distracting or really boring. And so if you flip your camera onto the portrait mode, you can capture more of the essence of the landscape that you were trying to grab in your shot. And you can see here that I've got the lines in the sand leading up to the tree, a little bit of negative space in the bottom as well, creates quite a dramatic effect. So sometimes it pays to, take your photo landscape but then flip your camera onto the portrait orientation and take another shot and just take a look at it and see how it works out. Now in this particular image, we've taken that to the extreme. This is actually what I call a vertical panoramic image. I've taken this with my tilt shift 45mm, a couple of shots stitched together. Now this is of the Opera House, the Sydney Opera House, which is very well photographed. And I've taken it from on top of the Harbour Bridge. Now unfortunately, very, very difficult to get any sort of amazing foreground. So instead I've decided to try something different. And it actually worked out to be one of my favorite images. I have this printed up on a huge canvas hanging up in the foyer of my house. And I really like the way that this image turned out. So sometimes you can just think outside of the square. You don't always have to capture all of the hero that you're trying to capture. Sometimes you can just get a part of it, which I have here with the Opera House. But then also, I've got that dramatic pastel colors in the sky as the sun is beginning to show its face. And here we go, one more example where portrait worked really, really well. Now this was taken with the Fujifilm GFX medium format camera when I had it on loan from Fujifilm, and it's sort of that medium form size, so it's an 8x10 I think it is. You can see the portrait works really well here. Now when I did landscape, it just included more of the same as where when I did it in portrait, I was able to get those leading lines from the dark sand in the foreground all the way up to those beautiful rocks leading your eye up to that sun that is rising just above the horizon. So once again, just think about how you can change the orientation of your camera to be able to grab something completely different. Alrighty, tip number 6 is to have some really strong foreground in your image. Now this is a fairly classic image. This is the tessellated pavement down in Tasmania, and it by its very virtue is very, very good foreground or strong foreground. In fact, you could probably just photograph this tessellated pavement and forget the horizon. Now I was lucky here that I had some beautiful color that morning and we've been able to capture that reflecting off of the water in the pavement. But the pavement really is the hero of the shot. So it just shows you that really strong foreground can be a real game changer when it comes to image composition. And in fact, if this was just a shot of the water with the horizon and that beautiful sunrise, it would just be, another shot. But by bringing this beautiful foreground interest into the image, it really does make it much more spectacular. Now, whenever I am shooting something that is a seascape, I do look for really compelling and attractive foreground. You can see here these great big rocks. Not only do they have really cool detail in them and lots of texture that makes you want to look around and just sort of get a bit of a feel for it. You can see the water crashing across them, but they lead your eye into the headland. So this is where I live, just around the corner, and this is the headlands that I have sort of that lead from the bay where we are out into the ocean. So you can see the two sort of heads there. But really the hero of this shot is the foreground. So good, strong foreground is always going to, I reckon, make or break an image, especially when it comes to seascapes. If we just stood on the water's edge and took a photo of that headland without any foreground, without any rocks, it just would not be anywhere near as compelling to look at. Now, when it comes to strong foreground, it's not just seascapes that can really benefit by that. This is the Jamison Valley, I think it is, in the Blue Mountains, which is a beautiful valley. As you can see, if you look off into the distance there, you can see all those, they're big eucalyptus trees, huge trees. So, it's a very, very vast valley that just draws your eye, and it's beautiful. There's mist floating through. You can see the rock ledges. There's all sorts of stuff going on there. But if you can look at the bottom 1/3 of the image, it's a very strong foreground. And I've picked this amazing piece of sandstone rock that almost looks like a log, but it isn't. And it's got a crack through. It's just really interesting. Lots of texture in it. A little bit of dead tree, some foliage. And to me, it just makes the image sort of, come a bit to life. Makes you feel like you're standing there on the edge looking over this amazing valley. And so no matter when I'm shooting landscape, I'm always looking for strong foreground that's going to make the viewer feel like they're standing in the image. So important. Now, tip number 7 is to look for symmetry in your landscape photos. Now, these trees have obviously been planted by human beings, and they've been put into rows for a particular reason. Obviously, it's easier, when you're farming trees or whatever these trees grow. But I couldn't resist but stop and take this photo. I think it really looks great. I was just lucky that it was the time of the year when all the leaves had dropped off and they were on the ground, so it covered the ground with beautiful brown leaves, and then we had these spectacular lines of trees to be able to photograph. But Symmetry just has something about it when it comes to taking a photo, and I think it just makes it interesting, and people want to look through a photo that has a lot of symmetry in it. So this repeating pattern of all the trees just really draws your eyes in, and really works really well. Now, another example of symmetry is to look for something that creates a fairly dynamic or dramatic shape. And you can see here that the timber on the edges of these, concrete jetties are really, they're creating a V. I actually call this shot Harbour V, because this is Sydney Harbour. You can see the Harbour Bridge in the background there. It really should be the hero of the shot. But here that V has really drawn people, draws your eye in. It frames the shot up, makes you look towards the bridge, and I think it just works really, really well. I think that I could have put the camera over the top of this edge and just photographed the bridge or photographed that pier with all those amazing buildings on it, all that character. But by capturing that symmetry of the shape in the foreground, I think just brings a whole new something from a composition point of view. Now we'll look at one last example when it comes to symmetry, and this is one that Mother Nature has provided. So rather than something that has been done by humans, whether it was planting trees or that V shape, this one here is created by Mother Nature. So we've got the sand dunes, the beautiful shape of the dunes. You can see that it's so well balanced, this shot. There's a third shade, a third of the sand not in shade, and then a third sky roughly. And it just works beautifully. There's a leading light coming up out of the left-hand corner down the bottom, up towards the horizon of the sand. And there's a lot of symmetry going on here. And so it just shows you that sometimes it doesn't have to be an object that has been created by humans, but instead it can be something that Mother Nature puts in front of you as well, and it can work really quite well. Well, there you have it, my 7 landscape photography composition tips. Now, if you've enjoyed these, head across to my website, which is on3legs.com. I've got an ebook there that you can download for free with 10 tips to taking better photos. So if you haven't got your copy of that, now would be a good time to go and grab that. Now that you've got these 7 tips, I think it's a good idea for you to practice them. You know what they say, practice makes perfect. Write down the 7 tips, go back through, look at the notes down below in the description, and use those 7 tips as you go out and you start taking landscape photos. Really be quite mindful about them and start to look for the different aspects in your image that you can use to create striking compositions. Well, if you enjoyed the video, you know what to do. See you on the next one. Until then, get out there and take some photos.